excited to talk to you today.
And I'm really excited. We're here representing Partners for Ethical Care, and I would just love to talk with you about what happened today in the UK with the Keira Bell case.
Yes, so many of us are just celebrating.
I know. It's exciting. I mean, I almost hate to use the word exciting. It's been a horrendous journey for Keira Bell. For anyone who's not familiar, Keira Bell, I believe she was 16 when she started on puberty blockers at the Tavistock Clinic in the UK. Went on to wrong sex hormones, double mastectomy. I don't know, did Keira have a hysterectomy as well?
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. I know she had the double mastectomy when she was still really young.
Yeah, and I think she's 23 now and really regretting the decisions that she made. And I've got a quote here from her. She said, "I made a brash decision as a teenager, as a lot of teenagers do, trying to find confidence and happiness, except now the rest of my life will be negatively affected."
Wow.
And it's heartbreaking that she went through that, but she's certainly not alone. Going to a gender clinic, looking for help and being immediately put on the path to gender transition. So she has sued the Tavistock Clinic in the UK, saying that they did not provide her the information that she needed to make a good decision. And she won. Do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, and how brave of her. This is such a hard thing to do because not only is it hard to put yourself in front of the media, but to say that you made such a tremendous mistake about something so essential about yourself. And then to come after, to have activists come after her, calling her, transphobic, and all the hate we get as adults who are just advocating for others. I'm sure she's just inundated. And so we just are so appreciative of her. I wanted to read this quote. It says, "In a landmark judgment that will have repercussions around the world, the High Court in London today ruled puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are experimental treatments, which cannot be given to children in most cases without an application to court." They are experimental treatments, and I'm just so grateful that the courts really recognize that and were willing to advocate for the truth.
Oh, absolutely. There's just no support. There's no research. There's no longitudinal studies about what these hormones do to children's bodies. And some of the hormones that they're using were used in menopausal and postmenopausal women for hormone replacement therapy, and they were found to have horrific side effects, heart disease, cancer, hypertension. And so they've stopped using those broadly with postmenopausal women. Yet they've started giving them, and sometimes in larger doses, to teenagers. That is just unconscionable.
And the puberty blockers cause, I'm in a couple of groups of adult women who got Lupron, which is a puberty blocker used to treat endometriosis and other issues. And they have just tremendous long-term, bodily holistic consequences from that. And they're trying to get this drug banned. They think that it's so dangerous that no one should be prescribed it, let alone children. Yeah. So one of the things that the court addressed was consent. And Maria, do you want to talk about consent? And in the U.S., we don't recognize children as being able to give medical consent, generally speaking, until they're 18.
Yeah. Here we've had 18 as the age of majority, and until that time, children were under their parents' protection. Parents provided consent for any medical procedure that needed to happen. But over the last few years, we've seen that undermined time and time again by the gender industry, trying to make children the primary decision makers for their own care. And children just don't have the capacity. I mean, you and I have talked before about the brain development, and our brains don't completely finish developing until we're in our mid-20s. And the last thing to develop is that part of our brain which helps us with understanding consequences, long-term thinking, planning for the future. That's the last thing that develops. And for making medical decisions, you need someone who has those thinking skills, who has that brain development to say, what's this going to do to you in 5 years? What's the potential for this in the long term? Children don't have that.
And the fact that this is experimental and we don't even know what the long-term consequences are, really nobody is capable to consenting to this,
Mhm.
especially a child, because we don't know what the long-term consequences are going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that the court recognized this as experimental, again, that's just so important, because what it means is that we're treating children who have gender identity issues with experimental medications. And one of the things the court recognized is that the Tavistock Clinic in the UK didn't have an alternate path. So for
Mhm.
kids who had these gender identity issues, it wasn't like they offered a couple of different options before jumping into these medical treatments. This
Yeah.
was the only option really that the kids had.
Yeah, the transgender industry has really just funneled kids into one path, and they will say there is no other option. Affirmative care is the only choice. And we've seen that kids who go to gender clinics, almost 100% of them are put on a path to transitioning to the opposite sex. And I hate to sound jaded and cynical, but the fact is, gender clinics don't make any money off of children who decide not to transition.
Yeah, that's really a sad but true point. If it, and one of the other things that I think is so important to mention is that nearly 100% of children who have these gender identity issues have comorbid psychiatric conditions that are often just completely put aside while a child is put on these experimental treatments.
Yeah, I've talked to so many parents who've said, my child was diagnosed with autism, my child has prior sexual trauma, my child has OCD. These are documented diagnoses that their child has. But if they bring that up in the school setting, in the therapy setting, in the medical setting, they're completely brushed off. It's not even considered. And that's, I keep coming back to the word unconscionable, but I think that's just the best word for what's happening here. Because if you have a child who has a prior diagnosis, as most of these kids do, let's look at that. What is that doing to affect this child? Autistic kids, we know, they struggle with change. And what bigger change do you have in your life than puberty? Everything's changing when you go through puberty. It's no surprise to me that a child on the autism spectrum is going to go, "Whoa, what's happening to me? I want this to stop. I just want it to stop. Oh, we'll give you Lupron and make it stop."
And
That's
they have no understanding of the long-term consequences. One of the
yeah.
things that I wanted to read is that the judgment handed down today established some important facts. First of all, people who support these treatments have consistently said that puberty blockers are fully reversible, and the court
Mhm.
said that's not true.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
Puberty
I want to
blockers,
interject really
oh, go
quick.
ahead.
The NHS, I believe, just recently changed their statement about puberty blockers, and they have said, you know what, we don't know that they're fully reversible. We need to change our guidance on that.
And yet activists in the US continue to say this over and over again. And so now we have High Court in England saying, no, this isn't true. They also say that puberty blockers do not buy time. They are the first stage of a medical pathway very few children come off of. So as you probably know, the research is showing that once a child is put on this, basically it's inducing a developmental delay. These children are then not capable of making more advanced decisions because they're being medically delayed. And then almost all of them end up on cross-sex hormones.
Yeah, yeah. And that's heartbreaking because the changes with the cross-sex hormones, many of them are irreversible as well. Girls who take testosterone, they will develop the facial hair, they'll develop the lowered voice, and those things don't tend to change. Those tend to be forever. And then when they change their minds later, like Keira Bell, there's nothing, you can't get your voice back. And I've talked to so many parents who are heartbroken because they said, I'll never hear my daughter's voice again.
Yeah, it's
Even if
just,
their daughter detransitions and comes back, they'll never hear her voice again.
yeah. And that just, as a parent, it's hard for me to imagine.
Yeah.
Another finding that the courts made is that there's no evidence that puberty blockers alleviate distress. Imagine giving this kind of intervention that has documented horribly awful side effects, and it doesn't even alleviate the distress that it's supposed to address.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear about girls who go on testosterone getting a testosterone high. And apparently that's a thing. They'll go on it and they'll feel amazing, because what does testosterone do? It increases your libido, it increases your energy. So they may feel that for a little bit, but down the road, that's not sustainable. That's not something that is changing them for the better in the long term. It's just a short high that they get, and it's not something that's gonna really make their lives better.
It's not a long-term treatment. And yeah, and that's the other thing, is that they said the pathway of blockers and cross-sex hormones has serious physical consequences, including the loss of fertility and full sexual function, and profound long-term risks and consequences. And again, the courts are finally coming out and acknowledging this, that these are profound long-term risks. That's really strong language for a court to use.
It is, but I think it's very accurate. One woman I heard talk about her experience after being on Lupron for, I think she was on it for just a few years. She said her bones are only 3% as dense as they should be. And I believe this woman was in her late 20s, early 30s when I heard her speak. And she said she'll walk, turn a corner, hit her arm against the wall, and she's broken her arm because Lupron has damaged her bones for the rest of her life. So
And
I'm
that's something that
so,
I've read about in these groups, support groups for Lupron users. Is sometimes people are confined to a wheelchair as a result of using these.
yeah.
They're not benign interventions.
No, they aren't at all. They've been used off-label for treating gender dysphoria, and I'm so pleased that the court ruled as they did today. I think that was exactly what Keira needed.
And other children. I mean, I feel like this has the potential to just really turn the corner for our advocacy for children, because we now have a court saying this is experimental, this is harmful, it doesn't alleviate the symptoms it's supposed to alleviate. All of these things that we have been saying and that have been proven scientifically, the courts are now saying you're right. And
Yeah.
they went through all this, and it's not a politically expedient ruling. This is something that there's going to be a lot of pushback on, because activists have so much power. One of the things that I've heard is that this is going to also have ramifications into our schools, because they're going to have to change the literature now. They can't say these are reversible. They can't say these are treatments. They're going to have to really alter how they're presenting these interventions, and state these are experimental. And we have just been joined by a parent who has children who have gone down this medical pathway. And one of the things that Maria mentioned is how devastating this is for parents when their children go through these changes. And for example, you're a mother who will never hear her daughter's voice again, and how heartbreaking that is. And we just wanted to talk about what you think are the implications of this ruling. How is this ruling going to impact schools, parents, therapists, doctors, and generally the treatment of children here in the US, if you have any insights?
Thanks, Erin. Well, I think that it's absolutely unconscionable the way that parents have been railroaded up till this time by the medical and educational community. They've been told that they can either accept their new son or they can visit their daughter at the cemetery. They've been told that puberty blockers are safe, that they're reversible, and that it's just a simple little pause button to buy more time so that their child can figure out their gender. And all of these assertions are completely disingenuous, when the fact is that there is absolutely no scientific evidence that halting puberty by puberty blockade is going to relieve any child's distress. There's no scientific evidence for that. And almost virtually all of the children that are going on to puberty blockade are progressing to cross-sex hormones and lifetime sterility. And so that is not a pause button. That is a one-way ticket to lifetime medicalization. And that's the reality of what's happening. So I think that I'm very excited by this judgment, where Keira Bell didn't just win, they got everything they could possibly have asked for, because this court actually sat down and listened to the real science and the real harm that was done to Keira Bell, which I couldn't be happier, because it's about time someone did.
And it's got to be so hard for her. She's just a young woman who
Yeah.
really was sucked into this, as so many are now.
Yep.
And I just am so appreciative of her for being willing to take a stand like this, knowing the kind of pushback she's going to get. But she's
Mhm.
going to have, I mean, this is going to impact medical treatments. It's going to impact the language used in schools, because the courts acknowledge this is experimental. You
Yeah.
can't tell children that this is going to relieve their gender identity issues.
Right. Yeah. Kiara is only 23 years old, and she's an absolute, I call her a shiro. I am so in awe of that young woman and what she has done, her courage, and the way that she has kept her head and told her story. And I am so proud of her. She has really done a great service, and not because she's going to, this is not going to help her, but I think that she's absolutely dedicated to helping the kids that are still caught in this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she said that was why she wanted to do this, out of her grave concern for the
right.
thousands and thousands of kids who are being mistreated the way that she was.
Yeah, yeah. She said that she wasn't really given any other options. When she went in, this was the only option that was presented to her to fix her troubles. They didn't have any other options.
And unfortunately, that's the case in many states in the US, where activists have banned therapy. And so children's only choice, parents' only choice, and healthcare providers' only choice is to put them on this path. And I just hope that what happens in the UK is going to inform the legislation and the policy in the US.
Yeah, that's why I'm so excited about the initiation of PEC. And because what we would really like to do is we would like to hear the stories from people just like Kiara that have been harmed and their families. We'd also like to hear from teachers and physicians and counselors and everyone else who is concerned, because it is really narrative that changes people's hearts. This case was built on the story of both Mrs. A, who's the mother of a teenage daughter, and Kiara. And this was this is a case around how those two families have been harmed. And there are so many other stories like that out there right now.
I'll just echo off what Lynn said. I'd ask people to come to our website,
Mhm,
www.partnersforethicalcare.com.
mhm.
Look what we have on our website, reach out to us, tell us your story, because we want to hear it.